Hello, geekologists. Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. Here we go, because you demanded it. The episode we've all been waiting for. We're probably the first podcast to ever talk about this subject. It's the first time for someone to solve the question that's on everybody's mind. We're going to have the final answer once and for all. Which is better, Star Wars or Star Trek? One has to win, one has to lose. There's a right answer, right? They have to compete each other. That's what geek culture is telling us out there in the world. All the clickbait stuff says that there has to be a final answer. There has to be a winner. There has to be a loser. And so we're going to solve that today. And well, friends, if that sounds a little off brand for systematic geekology, you're right. You're right. That is not the kind of episode that we're going to do today. Happy May the 4th be with you. In the spirit of May the 4th be with you, we are going to have a conversation, part of our Versus series, comparing two franchises and where they're similar, where they're different, why, if there is any tension between the two, why that tension is there, why people say that we have to compete against one another. That's the kind of conversation we're going to have today to model for you how to have a healthy conversation around these things that we geek out on. And so I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't do this episode alone. So we're bringing on board, yes, one of our new official hosts of Systematic Geekology, Matthew Winter. Matthew, welcome to the show. We've chatted before online and have intersecting Venn diagrams of our fandoms, but here we are, the first time ever. This is a historic episode when Matthew and Will come together and solve the problem of Star Wars and Star Trek. If there is a problem, welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, there we go. So glad you're here. Glad we can do this. Yeah, we'll share more about what our kind of history is with Star Wars and Star Trek and why we're having this conversation today. But first off, what are we geeking out on today? Matthew, what are you geeking out on?
Oh gosh. Read the book right now. Man, it is a slow trod because there's a lot to it. But Reaching Out by
Okay.
Nowen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Henry Nowen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm starting that. It's related to a class I'm doing at church, and it's good.
Nice.
Other stuff. I just started playing Xenoverse again because there's some new DLC coming, so I'm getting used to playing that again for the new DLC.
Nice. Yeah, I like it that we have like a wide range of hosts here at Systematic. There's a reason why we don't have just 2 or 3 hosts. Our goal is like 14, because we know that the breadth and depth of fandom and geekdom, what people geek it out from books and rich theology to games, board games, video games, and the MCU, all that stuff is there. So that's what we try to do here at Systematic Geekology. And so yeah, if there's something you haven't heard us discuss or talk about out there, friends, let us know, reach out, send us a message. Say, have you seen this? We're always looking for recommendations and things to geek out on. What I'm geeking out on, it's a good time to be an X-Men fan because of the cartoons and the comics that are coming up, but it's also like apocalyptic geekdom genre just isn't going away. It's always going to be around. And I'm not going to say Fallout. I'm late to the game on a show called Station 11. Matthew, have you heard of Station 11?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I didn't either until a friend said, "Hey, you should watch the show." And it's on Max. It's a 10-episode limited series. There's not going to be a season 2. It's a couple years old, and it is apocalyptic realism. And actually, my daughter was reading the book, and she told me she was reading the book and said it was really good. And I kind of forgot about it. And then when someone mentioned this show, it is such a good show. We did the finale last night. It is beautifully directed and shot, and the story, it is so good. So here's the deal. There's a flu pandemic that wipes out 99% of the world. And so 20 years later, they flash forward, flash back. What is the world like 20 years after, like everything goes to hell in a handbasket, literally. And so But the thing about this book is that it was written before COVID, like years before COVID, like 8, 10 years before COVID, maybe. And then they were filming this show and they were halfway through with it when COVID broke out. And so, so they had to shut this down because of a global pandemic, about a show about a global pandemic. And I can imagine what the actors and actresses who are filming this and read the script were like, "What is happening? We're literally living what is going on." Those unknown days of COVID, but it's a little triggering. If COVID was hard for you, and you're seeing people walking masks and the fear of death, and what are we going to do next, kind of thing. But man, beautiful in how it tells its story. It is geek adjacent because not only apocalyptic literature, but also is the underlying story is like this person writing a graphic novel that becomes like almost like a sacred text in this world for people in it. So amazing show. Can't recommend enough. I know we're still going to be quick about this, but I can't. Station 11. Just after last night, man, I was just like, man, that is good stuff. So that's what we're geeking out on. Let us get into the topic of the day: Star Wars, Star Trek, two of the most popular franchises that are out there, the best in the sci-fi game. They both have the most loyal and passionate fans, but also they have a part of it. A lot of fan backlash and a lot of toxic fandom around these franchises as well. And we're not going to solve all those problems today, but we're going to give a little bit of kind of our history behind it and kind of the nuance behind these two franchises, how they're similar, how they're different, and how we can handle those things. So, Matthew, I'll start with you. What's some of your history with both of these franchises? I know you kind of lean more into Star Trek, if I'm right, but like, what is your history with them, and where do you stand right now with these franchises?
As an adult, that's true, but
Yeah.
definitely. Like I can't think of a time in my life without either one of these
Yeah.
IPs. So I
Uh-huh.
mean, they go all the way back to just Matt as a wee little lad. Um,
Yeah.
um, gosh, as uh, a kid, this was definitely much more of a toss up for me. I mean,
Yeah.
I had all of the novelizations of the movies. I had I don't remember what it was called because it was so long ago, but my mom had signed me up for some kind of like through the mail Star Wars RPG thing. So I was reading a book and I would have character cards and all this stuff and go
Cool.
through and do missions and all that. So yeah, I had technical manuals and all that stuff. So I am no stranger to Star Wars, but I don't know. As I got older and matured and actually lived life a little bit, I
Mhm.
began to appreciate more of what Star Trek brings to the table.
Yeah.
Which I really think that's the basis of this whole conversation.
Yeah.
As a kid, the Force and lightsabers and all that are the coolest friggin' thing in the whole world. But
Yeah.
you know, as I grew up and hopefully matured, the votes out on that, but um, I grew to like Star Trek better just because it does more for me on a personal level.
Yeah. Nice. What would you say, like Star Trek right now, kind of what's out there in terms of some storylines or shows or movies that you're like, yeah, I just listened to the Earth Day Star Trek 4 episode that you guys did. I loved it. I went back. I remember seeing
Yeah.
that in the theater when I was younger, but then going back and watching at least the first half. I need to finish it, but man, I was like,
hmm
golly,
hmm
this is so goofy and fun and good. But yeah, like, is there a certain part now that you're like, yep, this is what really gets me up to watch or get into this certain
Oh gosh.
aspect of franchise?
I mean, right now I'm kind of on a Trek hiatus. I'm very cyclical and very obsessive with how I do things.
Yeah.
So, like I'll get into something and it's just full bore all the time that thing until I'm sick of it, and then I move on to my next. And I'm just not. I'm not in the Star Trek part of the cycle right now.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
There's seasons. There are definitely seasons
yeah,
of
but
fandom.
I am looking forward to. I haven't watched tons of Strange New Worlds yet, although I
Mhm.
absolutely love what I've seen. Um, Unfortunately, binge culture has kind of ruined a
Yeah.
lot of that stuff, and I want to wait
Mhm.
until there's more, and then
Yeah.
I can watch all of it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Well, what I've shared here at Systematic Ecology before that my top fan of my avatar is Luke Skywalker with a green lightsaber as a Jedi. But that I like you, I relate to the story that is always feels like has always been a part of my life because the first movie I saw in the theater was A New Hope when I was 5 years old.
Mm,
That at the end of that summer, and so from there as a 5 year old, getting all the toys and having my imagination sparked with this sci-fi fantasy, high fantasy, spirituality, good versus evil, superheroes,
right.
all that thing was a part of my early childhood. And then leading up to Empire Strikes Back as an 8 year old, it just could not have hit me in a better spot in terms of what all of us in the neighborhood and classmates loved and talked about and pretended to be when we were kids. And then you had Return of the Jedi, which put, kind of sealed up the story and did those kinds of things. And so then of course Star Wars, watching the movies on the VHS or when they came on HBO or whatever, and then the novelization of the extended universe and those things
Hmm.
came out. And then I hit teenage land. I was like, yeah, I love Star Wars, but I'm not going to lean super hard into like following every single book that comes out or that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of a hiatus there. But then when the prequels came out, we're like, yeah, let's jump back in. And of course, as an OG fan, I was kind of like, man, I really wrestled with the prequels and what they were doing and what George Lucas was doing. And I was a part of that fan backlash of like, if I would have written this, I would have done it this way. Why do you do it this way, George? I know better
Right.
than you. So I was a part of that, and then a little later on, to be honest, like I was excited that Disney acquired the IP because I was like, that means more Star Wars. I was a little frustrated with George Lucas and what he had done, and I understand why he stopped making Star Wars because of toxic fandom, and I thought it was kind of dead, and okay, but then here comes Disney to kind of resurrect it, to bring it back, and then here comes the fans again. We're like, if I was writing, this is what I would write for my thing. Again, that same echo of fans doing that, but Star Wars has always been a part. And I remember as a kid, Star Trek, I was way into anything sci-fi I could get my hands
Hmm.
on. I loved it. The original Battlestar Galactica on TV,
Hmm.
complete ripoff of Star Wars for the TV. Where I loved it. Buck Rogers, all that stuff on TV. I was like, yeah, let me get a part of it. And then when Star Trek came on, I was like, what? Why are they talking so much? Why are there blasters on like stun or phase? What is this? Why aren't there more lasers and action and dogfights in space? And then later on, one of my was like, oh, Star Trek is this is what it's trying to do with that franchise, as opposed to like Star Wars, high fantasy, faster, more intense was George Lucas thing. I think Star Trek, the original intent was let's be thoughtful. I don't think maybe the stereotypes there, but like Twilight Zone in space. Let's have a more in-depth conversation around nuance of like life and progressivism and futurism and what humans could be like in the future and how we can handle our problems. Star Wars was more like the space opera fantasy kind of thing. So
Yep.
I noticed that as a kid and leaned more into Star Wars, but as I get older, like you, matured, I'm a different person now than I was 5-10 years ago. So I definitely appreciate Star Trek. And then for me, I will also say J.J. Abrams reboots of the movie when he did the Star Trek reboot in 2009. I loved it because J.J. Abrams is a Star Wars fan. He wanted to make Star Trek more like Star Wars, and I understand original like fans of Star Trek why they're frustrated with J.J. Abrams. But for me, I was like, yeah, you're leaning right into my faster, more intense kind of thing. But I understand the criticism behind those things as well. So that's kind of our history behind and where we're coming from. Yeah, as you said, there's so much streaming, there's so much content. I wish I had more time to go deeper into Star
Yeah.
Trek stuff that's out there. But with my fandom, anything Star Wars comes up, I'm gonna watch it the day it comes out, kind of thing. And then maybe I'll get to Star Trek one day. I don't know when that one day is going to be, but maybe one day I'll do more of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and that's where
Um,
I was at with kind of prepping for this is I went through and I watched Solo, and I'm in Clone Wars right now, and I'm watching
Nice.
some of the Star Wars stuff I haven't seen. Which just reminded me how much I absolutely still do love Star Wars, because it is
Yeah.
awesome, and it's just as much a part of my DNA as Star Trek is.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Now, both of us would say out there, friends who are listening or hanging out and watching us on YouTube, that we'll confess that like Star Wars, Star Trek's not like the original sci-fi. There was a lot that came before it. They didn't
Oh yeah,
invent sci-fi.
nope,
I was going back and reading and prep for this a little bit, like what was the first sci-fi? And some people say like Mary Shelley's like Frankenstein in the 1800s was the first sci-fi speculative fiction monster kind of geeky genre.
sure.
I know there's the debate out there about that, but I think that's kind of neat that to think about going way back to the 1800s. I think all people always looked to the stars and wondered what's behind it. What could we be? Speculative fiction's always been a part of human nature and storytelling. But there's, again, like the pulp writing of the early 1900s of John Carter of Mars, and then you had Flash Gordon, you had Buck
Right.
Rogers, you had all those things. Then you had Dune come out in the 60s as a novel and sci-fi, and then you had the Space Odyssey, 2001 Space Odyssey in the
Right.
late 60s. And I
Yeah.
think that sci-fi was popular, and then Star Trek debuted. When did Star Trek debut? It was
It was 66.
1966.
Yeah.
66,
Yeah.
yeah, in September. So it was only had a few seasons,
Mm-hmm.
and then it had kind of a second breath when they started making the movies again
Right.
and leaning into next generation. But yeah, it predates Star Wars. But and George Lucas, he really wanted to do a Flash Gordon film, and he couldn't get the rights. So
Huh.
he says, you know what, I'm going to do my own Flash Gordon and write my own movie and do it myself and
Right.
make it more fast and more intense. From the get-go of the opening scene of A New Hope, boo, that big ship and lasers firing, we're going to go full steam ahead in the storyline. So Star Wars upped the game when it came to like franchises and pop culture and faster, more intense. But sci-fi has always kind of been there in the last 100 years or more when it comes to capturing the human imagination and thinking about science and who people can be and that kind of thing. So anything else to add there in the gaps of just acknowledging that there are
Oh,
franchises that have come before Star
oh
Wars and Star
gosh.
Trek? Yeah.
I think you atomic era sci-fi. You can't you can't not we can't not talk about Asimov.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
He's right in there. Really helped define the genre, and
Mhm.
his definitions are part of actually what I was using when we came up with this outline.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, yeah. So acknowledging those who've come before, we're all playing off each other's stories and ideas and building off those kinds of things. And I think we have to acknowledge that's kind of where, if you're going to pit these two against each other, you have to acknowledge what came before it, but also how they played off each other, borrowed from each other, mimicked each other, copied each other. Those kinds of things too, I think, is a part of this conversation when it comes to that. So Matthew, why in the world do we have to, or that people set up Star Wars and Star Trek against each other, or the versus aspect of this conversation?
I think influence. We just talked about, there was so much sci-fi and stuff that was out before, but like sci-fi was never the meta. It
Hmm.
was it was never something that was this super culturally influential thing. And I think Star Trek came along. It didn't do that right away.
Right.
Star Wars came along and instantly just changed everything,
Hmm.
as far as cinematic sci-fi, and then through that though, and then through the movies, and then some of the newer Trek spin-offs, or well, I can't say new. There's newer stuff, but the second gen of Star Trek there,
Yeah.
Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. It became just as culturally significant and part of the meta as Star Wars. And I think that and just the nature of the fandom and how passionate we are the two. You're not going to have someone getting up on their roof, shouting, at the stars dressed up like a Cylon. It's just not,
Right.
you, you know, like other fandom just don't have the intensity of Star Trek and Star Wars.
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with just the meta influence on culture as a whole
Yeah.
of these two franchises, and just the passion and or toxicity of the fan bases, really kind of make them where they're a similar cultural phenomenon, at least.
Yeah, that well said. I like what you said there about the game changer of Star Wars and kind of ramping up to that. If it wasn't George Lucas, it was going to be something. Something was going to do that, because I think we're primed and ready for one of these big grand narratives and kind of where movies and storytelling and narratives when it comes to the big popcorn flick and what's gathering people into the theaters and that kind of thing. I think I actually judge time. Of course, I judge time by the year of our Lord, and those kind of things and dates. But when I think of like pop culture, when I think of like years, before 1977 and after 1977. Like I like, oh, that was a movie. That's a story that happened. Oh, that's before George Lucas came on the scene and started telling Star Wars. Because I do think there was a different way you told stories, or way you did things before and after Star Wars, how you created movies to get people in the theater. And both these franchises have been commodified and franchised, and let's make some money off of it. And different times and places and ways that it's kind of eaten its own tail or tried to promote its own self or make money. And the money making machines, and they know that, the fans and those who are critics of it. So I think, how do we keep these monsters going, and how do we keep the monster fed as it moves forward too is part of that, rather than just telling good stories. I think is a part of that. But yeah, that's how I judge time. And I think, I wonder your thoughts on this. Like, I was thinking about this last night. Is like, what part of this rivalry comes from the outside of it and the inside? And the reason, the outside of it are is it people looking down in the early days? Was it people looking down on geeks when we weren't as popular, and the mainstay? Were people looking down on geeks and go, oh, look, you guys are all the same, the Trekkies and Star Wars, picking fun and bullying them? And then within the inside, you have the two, like, no, I'm not like them. I'm this way. I'm that way. I'm a Trekkie because I'm smart and thoughtful. And then the Star Wars, like, I'm a Star Wars guy because I like saving princesses in space, and I like lightsabers, and I like action. You boring friend. So one of those stereotypes are kind of fanned into flame by others from the outside, just because it was cool back in the 80s to pick on geeks and nerds.
I think that's actually probably very, very true.
Mm,
Because I don't think, internally, at least within the content, I don't think there's any kind of, deliberate, um, reference to each other at all
right.
within the material. They're very much deliberately their own things, not even trying to do the same thing, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, absolutely, from onlookers from the outside who aren't aware of the material, it's all just, you know, it. I had a friend, in high school, and she called it all Starland. Like
Ah,
it all
okay.
just like it all just existed in whatever. And whether you were into Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate, whatever, you were part of Starland in
Mhm.
her. So if you're not part of it and you don't get it, I can see why we all just look like crazy obsessed weirdos who were part of Starland.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think about kind of the tribalism in our culture when it comes
Hmm.
to like politics and religion and that kind of thing. You define yourself against someone who's you're not, because I'm a lifelong Lutheran. I'm a Lutheran pastor. A
Hmm.
big part of my life and upbringing is like, well, what's a Lutheran? Well, we're not Catholic. And it was like,
Right.
wait, that doesn't quite make, because if you go into our worship services, there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of people wearing robes, and there's a lot of liturgy, and there's a lot of
Yep.
peace be with you and also with you kind of thing going on. What do you mean we're not? What does that mean? So you dig into kind of where you are different, where you are the same, the common ground, that kind of thing. So I think I think, yeah, it's from the outside people looking in, but also from the inside too. There's a rival. There's something about our nature that wants to pit ourselves against other or huddle into our own groups and in group. And
Hmm.
if they're going to pick on me from the outside, I'm going to be safe with my own tribe this way. And it happens in fandom. And so I think that was kind of
Yeah.
natural for Star Trek and Star Wars to do. And then as geek culture grew and became a mainstay, when it comes, I mean, you had that with Marvel and DC. They were
Yep.
copying each other. I'm not DC. I'm not. Thor's not Superman, but Superman's not Thor. But guess what? Guess who's the headliner in Avengers #1 back in the 1960s? Thor. Not Captain America, Thor, because they needed like a Superman guy for the Justice League for
Right.
Avengers. There's a reason why they're doing that, and I do think sometimes a rising tide lifts all boats, but then also it can become toxic about who's better, who's worse, and that kind of thing. And so I think that's part of why we're having this conversation here around this holiday we call May 4th and Free Comic Book Day and acknowledging here comes summer with the summer blockbuster and that kind of stuff, to kind of go ahead and put it out there. And I love that within our own host team, we have both Star Wars and Star Trek fans, and we can jab at each other and tease each other. But at the end of the day, what is it that we're trying to share? What geeks us out on that kind of thing? So yeah, little role models out there. We talk about how, like, yeah, you think church can get toxic fans or toxic members. Guess what? Just go to Comic-Con, hang around Comic-Con for a little while, and
Oh
and
boy.
listen to some of the conversations, and it's no different. So yeah, you lifted this up, and I think it's important too. Like, when we're talking about sci-fi, we're talking about fantasy. Star Trek being sci-fi and its history of Roddenberry being like kind of a futurist, more agnostic, kind of anti-religion, but like, hey, there's hope for humanity. Science is going to solve our problems. But then in Star Wars, this save the princess in space, good
Right.
versus evil, laser swords. How would you define that? If someone was like, hey, what is the difference between franchises, but also like Asimov definition of sci-fi?
Right. So, I mean, that's why, like, one of the things when this topic came up, I instantly thought, I've always thought with this so called rivalry is that we're comparing apples to oranges.
Hmm.
Because really, like, Star Trek is true sci fi in almost every definition of the word. Um, and Star Wars, while it may happen in space, it's really just Lord of the Rings in space.
Oh, there we go.
I mean, it really is. It's just, it is good. It is good versus evil, and they call it the Force, but really it's just space magic. They're wizards in space. I
Mhm.
mean, they even wear robes, for God's
Yeah.
sake.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
um, so not that that's bad. I mean, fantasy is amazing and it is fantastic. But it is its own thing and does something different than what sci-fi does.
Yeah.
And the main difference is that sci-fi, usually the whole thing is built around some kind of scientific premise, usually. So for Star Trek, for instance, the catalyst of what helped unite humanity and create the Federation and all of that was the warp drive.
Hmm.
You wouldn't have Star Trek or any of that stuff if they hadn't invented that. And then the other thing is just
Hmm.
generally in sci-fi, what makes something science fiction and not just fiction is that it is based on existing scientific principles, just expanded on. It is to say, hey, what could this thing be in the future? And usually, like Star Trek, especially, you can Google, well, how does warp drive work? and there's just a full technical, whatever, scientific explanation of how it could all work and all of that. So what makes something science fiction is the science.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I like that. Like because when you ask, I love asking like real scientists. We have a lot around our congregation, and since we're in the research triangle near Duke and UNC, like we
Mhm.
often have grad students and doctors in particle physics and PhD in particle physics and
Yeah.
astrophysics and that kind of thing. So like when you ask them, like, which is your favorite kind of sci-fi? They'll often say like Star Trek because it's more realistic. They'll say,
Mhm.
yeah, I can't wrap my head around like the don't call Star Wars like realistic because you're right, it's fantasy in space. And so, yeah, some of these things just aren't capable of happening in space. But Star Trek, they at least try to acknowledge there's some scientific backing and speculation of what things could look like. And I think about our own world, like advances in technology, and then here this kind of emergence of AI and what could be possible. It could be
Right.
scary, but it could also be helpful. And what if there are like conscious robots here in 50 years from now? It's like, oh boy, here comes data or C3PO or whatever, like, oh, here we go, that kind of thing. And so what leads that kind of sandbox that we play in and speculate against to hopefully help us ask the question what it means to be human and our place in the universe is kind of what's behind these things. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that fantasy also gives us the fantasy storytelling gives us an opportunity to then ask those existential questions of what is right or wrong. How would I act in that situation? If I am my hero, am I a villain? Those kind of big questions revolve around fantasy, but sci-fi is a different way and a tool that it uses to get to those same kind of grand meta narratives that we just talked about earlier. So yeah, I think that distinction is good. There's similarities there; they play off each other. But man, I tell you. What would you rather? We'll talk about later. Our bonus question: What would you rather have? What would you rather have? Phasing, beam me up, warp drive, or lightsabers and laser guns? Yeah, we'll see. We'll tease that later on to do, do that. And man, there's something I was going to say about in terms of the spirituality and magic of fantasy and thinking through that. It's not that science fiction doesn't have religion, but
Mhm.
it does lean more into kind of the tension between the two rather than just kind of acknowledging this all part of one world that maybe Star Wars or high fantasy would do in terms of magic. Yeah. All right, so let's transition here. If we're going to say, what is the story or the morals or the myths that these franchises are trying to share? What would you say, Matthew? This is one thing we wanted to really kind of lift up. That there's not only fun popcorn fantasy. I'm excited about seeing all the special effects and how CGI works, but also what is the story that it's trying to tell? What was George Lucas trying to tell? What was Roddenberry trying to tell? And then what are these franchises trying to tell now?
So, um, you know, hmm.
I know. I love the pause. There's nothing wrong with the pause. I'm like,
Right. The
it's a good question. It's okay to sit with your thoughts a minute, gather your thoughts, because it's a big one. It's a big question.
Yeah.
What are these franchises trying to tell before like fandom reacts because they didn't, and I'm a part of that because they didn't portray a certain legacy character the right way. What
Right.
is the story trying to
Mhm.
say or communicate to us? Not necessarily an agenda, but what is it trying to say?
Well, Star Trek, at least it is almost singular in, especially for that atomic era.
Hmm.
Almost all sci-fi was dystopian.
Hmm.
It,
Yeah.
it, it was always post some kind of,
Event. Yeah.
event or, atomic, whatever, where, and then like humanity had to unite to survive or whatever. Um, but Roddenberry doesn't have that,
Yeah.
right? It's a it's a utopian future rather than a dystopian future.
Right.
And then that's all basically just, um, humanity was very much like it is right now. We invented warp drive, which got the attention of the Vulcans, which taught us we are not alone.
Yeah.
And then so with that, we explored we explored the stars, and we were able to create this really peaceful federation of coexistence, just based on um, the fact that they can transport and just replicate matter and things like that. There's no more wars or poverty because resources are infinite.
Right.
As long as they have the energy to create, they can just make stuff. So that's
Yeah, and I guess they also have that prime directive too. Like if there are
eventually.
other civilizations who are behind, we're going to let them catch up to our scientifically advanced. We're smarter than you, better than not necessarily better than you, but maybe I don't know. Like we're going to let you catch up, you guys who are behind, and not meddle a little bit. So there's that prime directive, a part of that, like that futurism as well.
So I really think whereas Star Wars is supposedly at least a long time ago.
Yeah.
So it's
Far, far away, a
far
long, long time
away.
ago. It's ancient. It's in the past of
Right.
a more civilized time, or a
Yeah.
warring nation, or a time when you could tap into the
hmm
magic and
hmm
spirituality of where Star Trek is
Yeah.
moving years forward, where we're going to lean
Yeah.
into the science, kind of thing.
And then back to the last question, I think that's more of some of the differences between typical science fiction and fantasy. Is science fiction almost always exists in our reality.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not supposed to be a different time or a different place or like a different universe or whatever. It is our it is our world, our universe, our existence, just in the future. Whereas
Mhm.
fantasy, at least good fantasy, world builds.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
in this,
Mhm.
you're in this whole other place,
Nice.
in this that is far removed from our reality. So um
That's good. Yeah, and I think people say George, say what you want about George Lucas in terms of how he writes dialogue or how he directs actors and kind of the acting, not winning any Oscars anytime soon, but in terms of the world building
right.
and the imagination behind it all, and using the technology of the day or the special effects of the day to help communicate what this world looks like and what it could
hmm
be, or that kind of thing. That's where he did. So that's kind of my frustration there with Lucas there towards the end of the original series and the prequels, is not listening to the other storytelling. You've built this great world. Listen to other people on how you can tell a better story with the characters that you have, kind of
right.
thing.
Right.
So instead of like the yes men, yes women around them saying this is what I'm gonna do, how do we let people, but yeah, I can see where that's hard to do. It's your baby. You're going to communicate what you
Sure.
want. So yeah, and I think I like this idea of Star Trek, of the explorer, the expanse of the stars,
hmm
and who we encounter is going to teach us who we are and our
right.
place in the universe. And then
hmm
I like that Star Wars does have this kind of good versus evil, the morality and ethics of what does it mean to love my neighbor, or to the light side of the dark side of our existence. What wolf or Jedi or Sith are we going to feed more into? Our fear or our hope and love for the other? So I think taking care of the other. So that story really speaks to me, especially this time in my life, as a minister, shepherding a community,
mm
thinking about the light side, the dark side, and what are we going to feed, what are we going to lean into more, or give more energy to, that kind of thing. I think is important in this day and age. Right along with that, we're advancing scientifically as fast
hmm
as we can,
Yeah.
rightfully or whatever, or dangerously. Um, and I do think, have you watched Three Body Problem or heard about Three Body Problem yet?
Three body problem?
Three Body Problem, yeah.
No.
It's a book by a Chinese author. Loved the book, and then they made a show on Netflix, and doing pretty well. And Three Bodies is like like uh, three suns or orbital. Um, bodies in space that
Oh
rotate
yeah.
around one another. Yeah. And so
Hmm.
there is the unpredictable. They're unpredictable. There's chance. There's random things that happen in the midst of all that.
Right.
So the reason I bring that up is because like this, the premise is there are aliens heading our way, and so what do they attack? They know they're going to get here in like a couple hundred years, 400 years. So what do they know that we're going to advance enough to where we can beat them by the time they get here. So what do? They attack our science. They try to
Mm.
put our science to a halt. They try to break that down so we can't advance, so we can beat them. So it's an interesting premise when it comes to that. But I think of that
Mm.
like Star Trek. Like that's another different way to think about like where are we going to be 100 years, 1,000 years from now? What's going to keep us being human? Or what makes us human. And I think that's what people wrestle with AI and robotics and those kinds of things.
Right.
But then Star Wars, reflecting back on magic and fantasy and good versus evil and empire and systems that can oppress. So all that's there and all of it's fun in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. There you go, folks. We could, man, I think I could talk about this maybe until tonight, midnight. We could have hours and hours of breakout
Oh,
sessions
absolutely.
of these things. And so, of course, we're not the final voice in all this, and we're not hitting on every single theme. If there's a theme that we missed or something that we're missing, or something that draws to mind something that you have about these ideas about these franchises, let us know. We'll keep talking about it. We're not going to stop talking about Star Wars and Star Trek. Let me just say that we're not going to stop. So Matthew, like in terms of, we talked about it a little bit, but is there a current or a favorite story or plot thread through the franchises, either one that you want to link to that in the greater canon that is your favorite, that you're like, yeah, this is what really gets me going when they start talking about this, when they start leaning into this aspect of this franchise or storyline, the greater canon? Is there something that's like, yeah, that's why I'm saddling up with a bowl of popcorn?
Gosh, that's hard.
Yeah.
For Star Trek especially. I can definitely say, oh god, maybe not even with Star Wars either.
Yeah.
There's, and maybe it's nostalgia, or what have you,
Hmm.
but there's definitely just something about that original trilogy
Mm-hmm.
in Star Wars. The initial vision before other people got a hold of it and expanded it. Now some of the expansion is good and it is better. I'm not saying that, but um yeah,
Yeah.
because anything that comes after, at least in theory, if it's good, really just springs from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then um I'm thinking here.
Yeah, while you're thinking, I'll just kind of echo that with Star Wars. There's some nostalgia about that original trilogy, and why I get a little touchy about legacy characters and those things. But I think
Mhm.
now, even with the Ahsoka series, the thing that got
Mhm.
me most excited is thinking about different ways to approach the Force that's not so binary.
Mhm.
Light and dark, or good or bad. The gray Jedi, the fall of the Jedi Order, because it kind of got too like institutionalized and turned
Right.
in on itself and blind. But then how is the Force for everyone? There's still oppressive regimes and empire and people who want to take advantage of a universe like that, or commodify it, or the lust for control and power. But
Right.
I think this kind of ancient idea of the Force and who wields it or not, and how to use that to make people better, or the universe the galaxy a better place. That's what I really lean into, get into, and so that's why these present. I love Mandalorian. I love Baby Yoda, but I want to know more, like his approach to the Force and where he's going to be as a Jedi. And then
Mm.
I'm
Mhm.
really looking forward to this Dawn of the Jedi movie. Like, of all the things they've talked about in Star Wars, I like what they're doing. I will, I'm not without my opinions on certain present day stuff, but man, when I hear about the plot line or what could happen with the dawn of the Jedi, way at the beginning of the first emergence of a Jedi and how to use the first, I cannot
Yeah.
wait. I cannot wait. And I think because it's not connected to a legacy character, maybe we'll come in with less baggage and be a little bit more open to that. I know I will. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm kind of looking forward to. And I do like Star Trek, and I like the original cast. I like the J.J. Abrams verse, but if they were going to put another Star Trek movie out in the theater, whoever's directing it, whether it's Quentin Tarantino or whether it's J.J. Abrams or whatever, or Leonard Nimoy comes back from the grave and directs another film, I'd be there ready to go with an open mind.
Yeah. The Dawn of the Jedi sounds, gosh, if it's good, it'll
Yeah.
be it'll be
Yeah, it could be a game
because
changer.
because I was always a fan of the KOTOR games,
Yeah.
so the Knights of the Old Republic.
Yep.
And just getting to see the the Jedi Wars way back was awesome. Just filling in, because that's what's cool. Like, yes, it's a lot. These stories are a long time ago, but just the reality that there's thousands of years of stories before the ones that we've gotten.
Yeah.
Is so cool.
Yeah. Now, is there and Star Trek does that a little bit too, right? Like you had the main cast and original cast from the '60s, but they've gone back and like the emergence of warp drive and leading up to that cast.
Sure.
There's been other captains of the
Yeah.
Enterprise before, so,
Yeah.
so there's some prequels there, and then there's some future, I guess, discoveries like the future of where it is now and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. They plan around with those timelines too.
There's 200 or 300 years there between that and when with the initial story that we got. But even more than that, if they wanted to go more alien with it, because we know that the Vulcans had warp drive a couple hundred years before we did, and then there are even older, more ancient spacefaring civilizations that have been out there for thousands of years that they encounter. So, some people don't like the more alien-centric story arcs in Star Trek. There is some contention there. But I have always loved the Klingon story arcs and the Vulcan story arcs, and some of the pieces where it pulls us a little bit out of being more human centric.
Yeah.
I'm actually exploring more about who and what these aliens are, but even in that, you're still able to get the takeaway and ask, okay, well, what does this tell us about humanity? How does this, reflect on my, my ethical standards and my, religious or not religious beliefs, as the case may be, or whatever.
Yeah.
By exploring something other than ourselves, right? We're always able to use that as a mirror to reflect back on, okay, well, what is it about them that is other, that speaks to maybe something that isn't in me that should be or could be?
Yeah. That's great. Is there a particular book or like show or something that leans into kind of like the Vulcan idea or those kind of thing, or the aliens?
Yeah. So it's Enterprise is hit or miss for people. I'm actually really a fan of it, but the entire 4th season of Enterprise is Vulcan centric, and
Nice.
basically, the Vulcans essentially at the end of that become the Vulcans that we're used to from the later series, because while Vulcans are logical and supposedly emotionless and all of this stuff, they also do have some kind of mysticism and spirituality.
Yeah.
Because the whole run of the movie, the original series movies from 2, 3, and 4, is really about Spock's soul,
Yeah.
The Vulcan Katra. So that's really good. And then some people don't. They think they're the worst episodes. I don't. Any of the Klingon episodes in the Next Generation, really,
Nice.
uh, when Worf gets to explore his Klingon ness, or any of the episodes that happen on Kronos, or are more Klingon Empire centric, where we get to understand a little bit better their feudal system and their honor system, and what it is to be or not be a good Klingon, and like how does Klingon honor
Mm.
compare to what we think of as honor? Are these compatible? Are we uncompatible? What can we learn?
I love that. Yeah, man, and good sci-fi and good storytelling helps us explore those questions, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why we
Mm-hmm.
keep doing it, and we'll keep telling this story. I think what makes us human is the ability to create and articulate story and meaning and purpose around it to help us process our lives and where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And so, yeah, I think where it runs into problems, and people have different opinions about, how they should tell their stories of their favorite characters in the same way, same way like if I gave a bad Christmas sermon about who Jesus is or isn't, people are going to complain like, wait a minute, that's not the Jesus I know. Like, so there there's there's definitely criticism to come around that. If you're going to just try to go off base and do your own fanfic on something, people are going to like, all right, that doesn't really match up with the canon we have here. But I think when people huddle around the kind of the campfires of
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi, they know good
Mm-hmm.
storytelling when they hear it. I think the emergence of the next big thing for Star Wars episodic television with the Acolyte, that the before the prequels and this emergence of the Sith, a couple hundred years, wherever it's set in the time frame, it's got a lot of lightsabers. I'm excited. High Republic era, blaze a lightsaber, and I'm going to sit up a little bit straighter in my seat. But I think, but then you had the fans going, wait a minute, there's this one comment in the Phantom Menace where they talk about we haven't seen a Sith in 1,000 years, and how come this is happening now? Did they not know? I'm like, let them tell their story first before you start like nitpicking canon and whether they're not going to line with George Lucas's vision yet. Let them tell their story first, and then at the end, listen to the whole thing first. Then you can go back and go, well, this sat with me, this didn't sit with me.
Right.
We're allowed to have those opinions.
But then the dark side does cloud the Jedi's ability to sense too. So
100%.
just because they haven't been aware of Sith for 1,000 years doesn't mean there wasn't Sith.
I know. I
So
know. Exactly. That seems a little. It seems a little
yeah.
easy to see, but I don't know. Maybe their opinions are clouded by the dark side of toxic fandom as well. Who knows? We've all been there. We've all.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Cool. This has been super fun. Yeah, and so we're gonna get into a little now. We're gonna wrap up here in a minute, but I do want to share our bonus questions. So
Yeah.
for patrons out there, you get to hear our answer when it comes to this. But if you're not a patron yet, hop over just a few bucks to help us keep going and moving forward and keeping our enterprise and our big star cruiser moving forward through the universe fandom. We're gonna ask the question and answer what we would rather have: beam me up tech or lightsabers. So there you go, friends. Thanks for listening. We know there's a ton of options out there. We know that there's so much that you could consume when it comes to streaming, and also when it comes to podcasts. But we're glad that we have a community here of hosts and friends and listeners who enjoy these conversations to help them think deeper about who they are and what's going on in the world. And so thank you, folks. And remember always, as I try to find the outro music, I can't find it. Just hum it in your head. If you're a fan favorite, then the outro music in your head right now. Just hum it and know that it's there. And we'll see you on the flip side. And may the force be with you always.
Live long and prosper.
You.